Even when you feel low, you can still go. Even when you feel slow, you can still go. Even when there's no hope, you can still go. I never answer to no, man, I still go.
Hello. Welcome back. So in this episode, we are going to talk about pseudo-element selectors. In the last one, we went over pseudo-class selectors. And in this one, we're not going to have to build a new page. I'll show you why here in a moment. But just to start off, we only are going to explore these particular five. I'm not positive there are a whole lot more than these. I haven't really explored it, if I'm being honest, because I haven't ever had a use for more than these ones right here. Of course, I'm sure the more you build, the more you run into. So eventually down the line, I'm sure you're going to run into it. But that said, let's go ahead and talk about first line and first letter. These are going to affect the first line of a piece of code and the first letter of a piece of code, just like they say, but they can only affect these particular properties of that item. And what pseudo elements ultimately do is they're going to style a portion of an element. So they're not going to style the whole element like we've been used to. They're only going to style a portion of an element. So the first line, first letter, before the element, after the element, and then when the user selects something. So what does that look like? Let's see it in action. Oh, and by the way, selection doesn't have a actual selector that it targets because it's more about the selection. So if I highlight and do this, then the selection would be that portion there that you can see that's selected. And this is the beginning code where we left it off on the index.html, and we have a mess of folders here. Just after this, before we jump into the next thing, we're going to organize that there. But for now, we have a whole mess of things there, and within that, we have our original index.html, so make sure you have that open, and then we still have our original app.css. And what we're going to do is we're going to target this first page, and that way we don't have to build a new page to see how these things work. I think this will work perfect for it. So the very first thing that we're going to do is jump over here to app.css and go down a couple. And I am going to copy and paste in a rule that I wrote in. So we're going to target the H1, and the double colon will signify that we're targeting a pseudo element. It used to be a single colon, and there was some confusion around things, but now it's double colon, so makes it a lot easier. And then we use the before, and what we're going to do is put some content in there. Now how I get this stuff is on my Mac, I'm going to hit Command Control Spacebar, and it's going to bring up a whole mess of different things that I can click in there and use. You have something similar on Windows, although I can't tell you what the shortcut is for that. But let's go ahead and take a look at what that looks like. So let's jump back into index.html and open up that web page. And then we've got to go to that web page. Let's see. Well, we are on that web page actually. So here we are. And before all of my H1s now, I have placed in this particular content. And what did I do? Well, in my CSS, I colored the background dark red, and I put in this content property with values of whatever I want, and it can say anything. So literally I can come in here and refresh, and it'll say anything before every single one of those with a dark red background. So you can do anything you want inside of those. But that's the H1 before with that content, and I put it on all of my H1s. Every single H1 now will have that particular content. So let's see something similar very quickly with the after. So we have H1 after. There we go. And now we have a theme going on. We have dollar signs on the inside, and then as you work your way out, you're dealing with sports and a fruit and an emoji. And so you can do things before and after. There might be like a little trademark logo, but if you notice as I highlight these, the before and after is not getting highlighted. It's only the actual content. So it's not necessarily included in the content as far as what you're going to be able to copy. You'll be able to see it and inspect it and everything as far as looking at it in here, but not actually being able to copy and paste the content if you want it like a non-clickable, non-copyable piece of content before or after a particular one. Now the trick to this is, let's say I took out the content piece and I left the background dark red. So I'm going to take out that, and I'm going to take out that, and we're going to go refresh, and we can see that it looks exactly like it did. So there's no dark red background, and the reason for that is without content, this before and after doesn't even basically exist. So you have to have the content property or a declaration in there with a property and a value. You have to have that declaration in there in order for those to actually appear on the page at all, the before and after. So that's how those are going to work. And then let's go ahead and talk about, let's see, selection. And selection is kind of a neat one. So what we can do is we can change the whole background color, and we can change the color of the words. And that's exactly what I did here. And then as I highlight, now my highlight is going to be affected differently than it was. You can see the words are now green and with a red background. When I did this, when I set this up initially, it was right around Christmas, and now we're into January 5th here. So I'm a little bit later than I wanted to get this video done, but that was what that was originally for, is to go, okay, hey, look, make it look a little Christmassy or whatever you want to do. You can do all sorts of stuff with it, but you know, the whole point is that you can affect the selected text. So no matter what I select, it's always going to turn it to that green and that red as it's selected. Now that can be overridden, so we'll talk about that later on. I might have like a specific element on this page. I'll just talk about it now. It's simple. Now I could have a specific element on this page where I want to override that selection so that when I select, I can tell it's different, like a link or something like that from the rest of the content, and I can make it specially overridden for that particular selected text. But in any case, let's talk about now the first line, and what that's going to allow us to do is we have this pre-tag that we have put in the index. And where's our pre? Right here. And it's got all the words separated. And so what I wanted to show you is that this pre, just this line right here, is going to give us, let's refresh, is going to give us that effect. So just that one right there. So if we go, we went background color that and color that. So we made it exactly the same as the selection, right? So when I select, that's basically what we're getting. But that one right there is the only line getting it currently. But I wanted to show you also on top of that, like let's say, for example, we do a class instead of a pre-tag, and we're going to target something we haven't made yet. We're going to call it paragraph 1. Okay. Dot paragraph 1. So let's go and make a paragraph now. That paragraph might do just fine. Oh no, it's already being affected by something else. So I'm going to go dot. And then we'll put in some lorem 25. All right. Let's see what that looks like. So now I have this line here that is highlighted, and it's only the first line. But you might say, oh, Robert, it is only one line. Well, check this out. So when I go and I minimize my window, if I can grab it here. Boom. So I'm making that line shorter. And so what's happening is it's only highlighting that first line. So when we look at that CSS, that first line is only going to highlight depending on the size of the particular device. So if I'm, on a little tiny device, then it's going to give me a little tiny first line there as soon as it updates. Once I clicked on the actual screen, then it did. And then you can go back out and it's going to highlight everything on that very first line. And it's going to just basically work like that. So you can see it in action just like that. Now, very last one. Let's talk about first letter. And let's make it a little bit different. And we are going to affect the pre again this time. And we're going to go first letter. And as you can see, what we did is we made it font size 70 pixels, color orange, and that way it stood out really well from the rest of this text. And interesting, it's highlighting very differently as well, because it's especially positioned in the line of the current text. So you can see we can affect all sorts of different parts of the element, but that's what each one of them is going to do. Very obviously, the before, the after, it's going to put content using that content declaration either before or after the particular element in which you're targeting. In this case, we used an H1. The selection is going to deal with all of the selected text by the user. Paragraph 1, this one is the first line, and first line is going to do whatever you want inside of here to just the first line of the affected selected text there, and same thing for the first letter of any selected text. So you can affect and effectively go in and change anything in this entire thing that you want. You should really see this start to come together. I'm going to take a minute before we end this video just to talk about you will hear, okay, stop learning HTML, stop learning CSS, you're learning too much, you're going into too much detail. And I just fundamentally don't disagree with what they're saying necessarily, because they're right. There's other things that you can move on to, and you don't want to get so bogged down in these details that you might never use. But I also think it's important to understand how a program works in its entirety, and going into depth on a single subject is sometimes so much better than all the breadth and depth. So we want to talk about depth of knowledge, which is what I'm doing here. I'm bringing you very deeply into knowledge of HTML, CSS, and then you're talking about breadth of knowledge, which is moving on to another subject. We're talking JavaScript and moving on to React and doing all those other things. So eventually we're going to get to that breadth part, but the depth of it, I think, is also equally important in understanding how the programs work with each other. So I just wanted to address that really quick and let you know that we are going to go into depth on things, but later on you're going to see how that helps you out, because as you go into detail on these other programs, you're going to recall this early stuff and be like, hey, how did I do that thing early on, and how do I do it with this new thing? And things will start to really click in for you that way. Whereas if you constantly go out in breadth only and you're changing, well, then you're going to end up with a lot of shallow knowledge, right, about each subject, and that's not what you're going for either. You want to be able to use your skill to build something really cool. Well, you can't build something really cool until you've gone into great depth. Is that going to happen with HTML and CSS? Not likely. JavaScript in there, you're starting to get serious, but you know, there's better tools, and you definitely want to go more in depth later down the road on those. So you know, that's really up to you and how you feel, but that's how I'm approaching this situation, and just wanted to briefly touch on the subject before we move on. But I will catch you guys in the next video. Thanks for stopping by.